Comité permanent des opérations gouvernementales et prévisions budgétaires, le puissant comité OGGO, comme on le dit. Nous avons 2 témoins aujourd'hui. Nous allons commencer par des déclarations de 5 minutes. Et nous allons commencer par Madame, dont je vais certainement mal prononcer le nom, Smaganis. Alors, Madame, la parole est à vous d'abord, 5 minutes. Je m'appelle Crystal Smaganis. Je suis aussi au nom de la Ghost Warrior Society. Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Bacra, sorry, interrupt. Go ahead,
My
Mr.
apologies
Bacra.
for interrupting the witness. Yep. I don't know if others are getting noise confusion through the headsets, but I couldn't hear your introduction, and I think interpretation might have been speaking over the witness.
Thanks. We'll start again. Can I ask you just say a few words, and we'll see if our interpretation system's working properly? Why don't you start again at the beginning?
My name is Crystal Samaganis. I come to you from the Kimanan, which is the traditional territories of the Tamale First Nation and the Temiagam and Anishinaabe, where I live with my children. Does that suffice? Can we continue? We're good? Again, my name is Crystal Samaganis. I am the leader of the Ghost Warrior Society against First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identity fraud. We are a grassroots collective of volunteers made up of activists from across all sectors, whether they be arts and entertainment, academia, culture, language, virtually all facets of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit life. We have been meeting for over 3 years because we saw a deficit in the data collected in regards to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identity fraud. For the purpose of this session, I will be saying the word Indigenous, but I specifically mean First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. It is important to know that we have been gathering information for decades. I have been immersed in this issue for decades. As I see, as a 60 Scoop survivor, the roles of my people supplanted by those who say they are us, but they are not us. And there is one key concept that I want to partake to you today, and that is the acronym CPAIN, which stands for Corporations Posing as Indigenous Nations. When it comes to reconciliation, we have a performative element that is consistent across the board in all sectors across this nation, in which individuals and corporations are pretending to be Indigenous and take up spaces to which they are not entitled. The CPAIN is a term that we got with our affiliate, derived from our affiliates that we work with across Turtle Island, most notably the Tribal Alliance Against Frauds, which essentially does exactly what we do, but in the United States. We collaborate often because the people that we expose as fraudulent and taking up space to which they are not entitled move freely across this continent. The issue of CPAIN is far-reaching. And in our meetings, our volunteer meetings with zero resources, we have been meeting for over 3 years, and we have discovered that there are billions of dollars in resources that are pilfered by corporations, entities, and individuals who are pretending to be Indigenous when they are not, hence the term pretendians and pretendianism. This is a very serious issue. We do not wish to suggest otherwise by using the word pretend. We use it for ease of conversation in those who must speak about this issue. For us, the Ghost Warrior Society, one of the most horrific corporations that we have had to deal with over these last few decades has pilfered over $163 million since 1994, posing as an Indigenous nation when they are not Indigenous, and that is the Nunatukevoot Community Council. I implore you all to watch a 2-minute video from inuitknow.ca, which clearly positions the Inuit people and their view on the Nunatukevoot, which has morphed from the Labrador Métis Association into the giant corporation gobbling up First Nations, Métis, Inuit resources to which they are not entitled. As recently as last month, when they received $24.4 million to erect a new treaty center in their lands. Conversely, and finally, the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples is the pretendians' gate to funding, and they also rally on behalf of the Nunatukovut and other entities which claim to be indigenous to garner money, resources, and the sole purpose of pretendianism is First Nations, Métis, and Inuit resource acquisition. And it must stop. There must be legal sanctions to curb the unpilfered, unregulated, unstudied theft of very limited First Nations, Métis, and Inuit resources. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Carignan, we'll turn it over to you, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. Pour ceux qui parlent français, je m'appelle Denis Carignan.
For those who speak French, my name is Denis Carignan, but I grew up in Saskatchewan as Dennis Carrigan.
In English, just because I'm more at ease in English. I'm president and co-founder of a company called Plato. We are an IT services company that was founded in New Brunswick in 1997. It's a company that operated for the first almost a little over 20 years of its existence as a non-Indigenous owned company. And I'm a First Nation person from Saskatchewan, from the Pasqua First Nation. And I met the original founder of that company in 2015, and we had the idea about creating a company that would seek to invest in Indigenous Canadians, First Nation, Inuit, Métis citizens to help them develop the skills and provide employment within the technology sector. What began as a conversation in May of 2015 has turned into a company that is now employing over 140 First Nation, Inuit, Métis citizens. And it's a company that employs around 400 employees from Halifax to Victoria, British Columbia. We have developed over the course of our history a training program. It's essentially a new application of an apprenticeship model, a training model that's been around for hundreds of years in skilled trades. And really the focus is to identify Indigenous Canadians that are interested in pursuing careers in technology, providing market-based learning, supplemented with some accreditation through New Brunswick Community College, as well as micro-certifications that are useful in building a career in technology. To date, we are about $40 million in annual revenues in terms of consulting revenues, and we are an almost 30-year-old company that became majority Indigenous owned in January of 2022. So since becoming majority Indigenous owned, we have sought to find a way to be a part of federal government procurement projects. To date, almost 100% of our revenue comes from either the private sector or from provincial organizations or else organizations across North America, with about 12% of our revenues annually coming from American-based companies. We are an outsourced company. We're able to provide employment opportunities for Canadians that either reside in cities or who have developed the skills and who reside outside of cities. And in fact, we've got a handful of employees, about 10, that are at home working and generating a livelihood in their home communities. And these communities range from the Flying Dust First Nation in northwestern Saskatchewan to the Okanese First Nation in southern Saskatchewan, and a handful of others across the country. In terms of trying to become a vendor for the Government of Canada, we understood that the Government of Canada is a very sophisticated buyer. It's a buyer that prefers scale. So it is sort of set up for organizations that are very large, international consulting companies, to do better on projects. We definitely understood that. But our model of developing Indigenous technology professionals really involves working on projects so that we can develop the skills and expertise that folks can use to build their careers, build their acumen over time. And we know that we're able to actually generate employment opportunities, and with the most senior of our technology resources that are Indigenous now entering into their 9th year of professional experience. They're no longer entry-level or junior-level resources. They're now intermediates, and are starting to specialize in different technology areas, ranging from software testing, which is our primary service offering, to other areas like business analysis or project management, different skills that are in demand in the technology sector across Canada and across the world. We knew that coming into the Government of Canada, there were some certifications that were required. So over the course of the last 2.5 years, we've sought to become certainly registered under the Indigenous Business Registry, certifications under the TBIPS process to make sure that we qualify for projects of that nature, We have one of our offices that's certified as controlled goods. We've worked through the secret level security process. We've also become a technology partner with the likes of companies like SAP, Microsoft, and Tricentis, who are industry leaders and whose products are used by the Government of Canada. Really, the goal for us is to, become a company that qualifies as a vendor. And in so doing, we've learned a lot. And we know that the Government of Canada is a formidable place to become a vendor. But as a company that is new and one which is not new, because we're almost 30 years old, we believe we have some insights and offerings that we can maybe provide that can be of help to this committee in terms of its mandate of looking at Indigenous procurement across Canada. So with that, I'll say hi and thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll start with Mr. Genuis for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both of our witnesses, and thank you for the opportunity that we have with this important meeting to discuss the issue of Indigenous procurement and some of the abuses that we have heard about through the Arrive Scam scandal initially, and now through some further investigations that have been done. And we've heard from Indigenous leaders who have said that there is a significant problem in this Indigenous procurement space with companies that are either not Indigenous or perhaps some misuse of the rules that allow the primary beneficiaries to be non-Indigenous companies. And this is the spirit in which we're engaging in this important study. I'll start with a question to the Ghost Warrior Society. So I think there are probably three distinct categories we can look at of abuse or potential abuse when it comes to Indigenous procurement. One is just complete fabrication or misrepresentation by a company about Indigenous identity. Another is the misuse of joint ventures, where you have officially a joint venture gaining advantage of a contract that's been set aside for Indigenous peoples, but in effect, virtually all of the benefit from that contract is going to the non-Indigenous partner. And then you have the kind of case of contracting or subcontracting and subcontracting, where you have a kind of a very small shell company getting contracts and then subcontracting all the work and subcontracting to non-Indigenous companies. So in all of these different kinds of cases, but we're seeing efforts by the government to say they've checked a box in terms of Indigenous procurement, but substantively the no or very limited benefit is going to Indigenous peoples. And part of the problem we see behind this is that the government is maintaining its own list of Indigenous businesses that is not consistent with lists that are put together by Indigenous organizations themselves. So I want to just drill down on the Indigenous procurement issue. Why do you think the federal government would maintain their own list? And why is the federal government struggling to actually define parameters of a program that would see Indigenous peoples being the primary beneficiaries?
Through our initial forays and research into this multifaceted issue, the problem is there is no unified or central body that regulates that authenticates Indigenous identity or monitors, these agreements once they have been set up. And when you define First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identity, that varies from region to province to territory, federally, provincially, and there's just no central body that oversees everything. There's a lot of piecemeal efforts being made across the country. For instance, there's something that's academic specific. There is something that's specific to arts and culture. There is something specific to economic development. And here with procurement, that's only 5%. So when you look at non-Indigenous, interest, they already have 95% of the market. And for them to have exploitations and considerable impact on that remaining 5% that is remaining for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, this is a travesty for sure. And there needs to be some more concrete measures, some more meaningful sanctions put into place for those who abuse the system.
And just to follow up on that, I think some members of the government will say, and they have said in past meetings, well, identity can be really complicated, and there can be marginal or ambiguous cases, and there might be some cases where different Indigenous peoples disagree about kind of how that identity is precisely defined. But I think there are also many clear-cut cases we've seen, cases where the federal government isn't keeping track of subcontracts. So they're supposed to have this rule that when there's an Indigenous procurement set aside, a certain percentage of the subcontracts are Indigenous, and there's no tracking of that whatsoever. And that seems not so much like responding to difficulty, but sheer negligence and disregard for the results. How do you make of this? What do you make of this lack of tracking of information that we've seen?
When it comes to the issue of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identity fraud, there's a lot of work to be done to displace the self-identification of Indigenous identity. Self-identification is one model that has been in place for decades, since early 1990s, and it's problematic and has always been subject to failure and exploitation. The problem with self-identification is it relies on an honor system, and as we know that there are many interests out there who are not honorable and will bend the rules, lie, and misrepresent themselves in favor of economic gain. So without an authoritative body to really oversee all of these facets, right down from conception all the way to development, project delivery, and maintenance, then there will continue to be.
And just quickly on that question of an authoritative body, I mean, wouldn't it be simpler for the federal government just to have engaged Indigenous organizations that are working on these issues of Indigenous business already, rather than try to create their own processes or lists that are separate from the people that are Indigenous themselves and are already doing this work?
I think a problem that's systemic across, dealing with colonial governments is they always say that whatever is out there to define First Nations, Métis, Inuit identity must be led by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. However, that is not the case. We have colonial interference in all levels of government and across all sectors, and without the leadership from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, there are going to be shortfalls, and there's going to be exploitations continuing well into the future.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Atwin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. I know a lot of, I will have to say, our witnesses, what you say will be put into our reports. There's a lot of preamble here from some of our committee members making certain assertions or assumptions, but really it's what you're bringing to the table that we really appreciate for this important study. So I'd just like to ask really quickly for the Ghost Warrior Society, when were you approached to present at the committee today?
A couple weeks ago.
Okay, do you have the exact date?
That would have been after the global news story of September 28th, okay. Sorry. Just a few days in advance of September 30th. Every Child Matters Indigenous Recognition Day. And it was the week following. I cannot pinpoint an exact date, probably the Tuesday or Wednesday after.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do want to direct most of my questions to Mr. Carignan, specifically because Plato, it's originated in New Brunswick. That's my home province. I've been able to witness firsthand some of the incredible work that's done with Plato, specifically with youth in particular as well. But if you could just start us off, what are the main barriers to economic development for First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities? What are those unique barriers that are faced by communities?
I can speak mainly to some of the barriers that exist in the technology space, and they're because it's quite a large question. But when it comes to the technology space, part of it is really there's not that much awareness of the opportunities that exist in terms of pursuing livelihood in technology in many of our communities. If we go out to our communities, we see that a lot of the youth are very comfortable with technology. They are utilizing a lot of the skills that would be useful in an employment or a career context. But sort of having the, I would call it, the role models to follow, there just aren't very many inside of technology. So if you look at where a lot of our post-secondary students who are entering the post-secondary system go, they tend to go where there are people that they already know. So we got a lot of folks that are entering programs and social work or addictions counseling or education or nursing, where there are already people from the community that are in those roles and that are succeeding, and that they've provided sort of a path to follow, and they're kind of known commodities. But when it comes to technology services, quite often the technology that comes into our communities comes in as a product you buy or a product you download from the internet. And the path for how you actually can find that career isn't as clear. What we have found over the course of the last 8 years with our own program is that, we find we really work with local Indigenous training organizations, community counselors, post-secondary institutions, that kind of thing, to try and find individuals that are interested in careers in technology. And usually that's the first thing we ask is, why do you want to do this? And folks will tell us, well, I've always had a computer on my desk, or I, do my own digital media programming, or I do, I have a business that I offer services to individuals. That's that initial desire is what we look for. And then we're also looking for skills that are important in our industry. So the ability to, think critically, to follow logical thought patterns, the ability to communicate. And then we take that, we run them through a 20-week program. And inside of that program, it's basically everything you need to know to be a successful entrant to the career space as a technology tester in Canada. And the program includes technical skills training, sort of things you need to know and be able to do, but also professional skills. How do you interact as a consultant with a development team that may be situated in Lisbon, Portugal, and there may be language barriers and things like that. So we do try to develop that. And then we try to remove barriers by offering a guaranteed employment offer for those that successfully complete the program. And then we wrap our arms around folks and using that apprenticeship model and providing ongoing coaching and mentorship support for the first couple of years. But to answer your question, what we do see is that with the people that we've had that have successfully joined our company and are working away, it becomes way easier to recruit from their communities and their families, because all of a sudden there's somebody there that I know. And you know what? Maybe I'd like to do what Auntie does or what Uncle does. And the next thing you know, we've got multiple members from the same community. Sometimes we have multiple members of the same family that take subsequent training courses. And for myself, as if I look at it through a policy lens, the best way to get our youth into more STEM-related studies in university is to actually have people they know that are succeeding in those career spaces, and that will help generate a pathway for building that pipeline.
Absolutely. I've got such limited time, so I've got about a minute left in this round. But I was going to ask about that impact and what that means, and you really eloquently spoke to some of that. Just even in one family, for example, some of the impacts, the ripple effects that can be seen, and specifically that the piece of Plato where you've got that employment offer at the end. Can you speak to how important that is specifically?
The idea was really to remove barriers. And when you look at most of us got our first job because we knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody, and that helped us get us in the door. But if there are no other members of communities that are in the technology space, it's harder to do. So the idea was to remove the initial barrier. And then the second one was through our training program, you start to develop that initial network of professional people inside of the space. Because quite often we're there to solve problems. You might run into a situation where you don't know the answer. First thing you do is reach out to somebody you know that say, have you seen this before? Can we use that? We see that offer of employment. Originally, I guess we designed it as part of a carrot to get people through the course, but really we think it's a way of actually putting our money where our mouth is, in the sense that, we say we're going to offer that employment. It is an offer. People are free to accept. Once they completed the training, they're free to accept any other offer. If they get a better deal from a different company, they're free to accept that. But our guarantee to the trainees is that we will offer you that employment. And most accept it, probably because inside of that training cohort, there's a community that's established. And then that community becomes the first professional network that exists within the same enterprise.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll now go to Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My first question will be for Ms. Samanigas. So it's not easy to call out people who are pretending to be Indigenous. You have a list of many individuals and companies that are pretending to be First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. How did you draft up this list?
So the Ghost Warrior Society are done in affiliation with other grassroots organizations such as the Tribal Alliance Against Frauds in the United States, as I mentioned previously. as well as other collectives such as the Indigenous Women's Collective, the Toronto Circle of Matriarchs, and all of these other grassroots collectives that study the issue of pretendianism. Pretendianism is so prevalent in our spaces is that it's creating a lot of toxic work environments for people. And what's happening is our people are suffering isolated traumas across this nation in workspaces, in campuses, in cultural spaces, and industries into which they should be able to move freely and safely. However, this has not been the case. So when it comes out to pretendians, we are intent on taking back space from people who have taken space to which they are not entitled. Some of the more notable cases are on our website, such as Beverly Santa Maria or Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafone or Michelle Latimer. So these are harms that are imposed on our communities and drove us to action because there's really nothing being done. There are no legal sanctions for pretendianism. There's no consequences. One of the most notable cases was of Amira and Nadia Gill, who pilfered over close to $200,000 in post-secondary funding from Inuit students over a 7-year period. Yet there were no legal consequences for them. There's no sanctions. There's no deterrence. Therefore, there is no expectation that we would have any fairness as things stand right now. There needs to be change. There needs to be legal changes made. There needs to be consequences for pretending to be Indigenous when you are not, and for taking resources to which you are not entitled. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. This is a question for both of you. I have 3.5 minutes left, so you can share the time. In terms of Indigenous procurement, there is a compliance audit that's done. They look to verify if someone is truly Indigenous. Are you aware of this verification process? Do you think that the criteria for this verification are sufficient to prevent non-Indigenous organizations from passing as Indigenous companies? And what should be the criteria that is implemented to prevent that there be these identity frauds?
Is that for me? Sorry.
Vous pouvez répondre tous les deux, chacun à votre.
You can both answer each in your own turn. We can start with you, Mr. Carignon, followed by Ms. Maginnis.
Oui, désolé, j'ai ici les questions en français, donc.
Sorry, I wasn't 100% certain of the question in French.
For us, we do, we're an IT services company, and we're a training company secondarily, and we rely on individual community organizations to connect us with potential trainees. So one of the things that we do is, we seek out funding to provide the training for the individuals, oftentimes from these organizations, and they know best who are the members. They know best who are the citizens of their communities and who are legitimately entitled to programming that they offer. So that's one way that we use essentially a proxy, because it's impossible to know everyone, and it's important for us to know, get some local knowledge of who the people are, what their interests are, and then also that's one way for us to validate that people that come into our program are Indigenous and are who they say they are.
Ghost Warrior Society, I would concur that what is currently in place is ineffective. And also, we also use that proxy protocol, meaning that when we are authenticating, we do not say to the Dene Nation, this is not your person. We ask the Dene Nation, is this your person? Is this your member? Is this your beneficiary? And we always collaborate with the nations claimed by the individual or by the corporation or entity to say, is this a legitimate organization? We are not ones out to say this person. We work with the nations claimed, and that's a very important distinction to make. And I think that any solution must be First Nations, Métis, and Inuit led.
Rapidement, est-ce que c'est aussi ce que devrait faire le gouvernement?
And is this what the federal government should be doing? Should they be using certified Indigenous organizations to determine if a company is or is not Indigenous?
Actually, yes, because when you look at any Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, Inuit entity, organization, or corporation, they are operating within the parameters of not only their community, their land base, they're operating within an umbrella organization such as the Union of Ontario Indians or the Anishinaabe Nation. There are always, larger political bodies that must be involved in all aspects and all levels of verification and throughout the process. And so when you collaborate with these, umbrella government organizations, Treaty Number 9, Treaty Number 6, and you engage with those governments, you are empowering Indigenous people across the board. You are validating their processes, their nationhood, their autonomy. And it's really important that government really listens to those governmental political bodies and organizations that are already in place. And especially when they say things like the Nunatukuvu Community Council is not eligible for the amount of funding that they have received over these many decades. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Backrack, please.
Thank you. And thanks to our witnesses for being with us today to answer our questions on this important issue. And I apologize if my point of order near the beginning was a bit abrupt. I wanted to make sure that I could hear everything that was going on, and it was a little bit challenging, so forgive the interruption. Ms. Smeganis, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Your last point about allowing Indigenous nations to verify that individuals belong to them, as opposed to asking the individuals who they belong to, seems like really central to this question of Indigenous identity. Is that at odds with the way that the federal government is currently confirming indigeneity when it comes to procurement?
The problem is when colonialism meets cultural protocol that has been, present for centuries and centuries and centuries. There are many non-colonial entities that still operate within the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities and spaces, such as the Ghost Warrior Society or other medicine societies that exist and uphold our cultural integrity. When it comes to procurement and engaging with those organizations, you are validating their processes, and that is probably not a colonial approach, but is the lack of colonial, mindfulness of how First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identify ourselves outside of colonial mechanisms and frameworks. That's important. That is keenly important in furthering the economic growth of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. I hope that answers your question. If you have anything more specific, I'd be more than happy to answer.
No, that's very helpful. And you talked about the need for a central organization or entity that could, in a proper way, verify the identity or the legitimacy of Indigenous organizations. And I know that a number of national Indigenous organizations have recently formed the Indigenous Procurement Office. I wonder if you're familiar with that and whether you think that kind of body could hold promise for serving the function that you noted.
I see a great deal of potential in that kind of organization. I was involved with the Native Women's Association of Canada last year's event in January of 2023 regarding procurement that happened in Gatineau, Quebec. This coming week, I will be speaking at the Union of National Employees Women's Conference 2024 to speak about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit identity fraud in relation to economic development in women's movement. It's really important that recognition and empowerment is given to these First Nations, Métis, and Inuit bodies so that we can tell you how we would like to be measured, how we would like to be seen, how we would like to be validated. And these are our validation processes, and you must listen to those. Because when colonialism ignores the Indigenous way of doing things, problems happen. Problems happen, and exploitation runs rampant unchecked. And this is what motivated my journey here today, to try to make positive change in something that has just basically run roughshod over my people's resources, my people's spaces, my people's autonomy.
Thank you, Ms. Meganis. I wonder, Mr. Chair, if I have a moment to pose a question to Mr. Kerrigan. I'll take that as a yes.
Sorry. Yes, you've got 2 minutes.
Oh, fabulous. Mr. Kerrigan, in the letter that you sent the committee, you've highlighted how you feel that some of the verification processes pose a barrier to entry for Indigenous businesses seeking to participate in procurement. Could you perhaps lay out in a bit of detail
Sure.
what specifically those barriers are?
Sure, I can. And by those, I'm not referring to whether business is Indigenous or not. What I'm referring to actually is just the certification processes once going in. So I refer to the TBIPS process and the various security processes. So, if I had been, a startup business and I came in and wanted to do this, each of those processes does require a fair bit of time and effort to complete. And the completion of those doesn't guarantee that there's actually work at the end of the day. So we're able to do that because we're an established business with professional, a CFO and a professional sales team and all kinds of things. So we're able to generate content. We're able to satisfy those requirements to make sure that we can get those certifications. But if part of the goal is to create more Indigenous suppliers, especially ones that are at the startup level, it's awfully difficult as a company that's trying to manage cash flow and trying to manage its payroll to be able to go through and do all these extra things. So if there's a way of either supplementing that or as part of an Indigenous procurement, having your capacity partner being your big company, actually supporting the smaller company to develop those skills, develop that experience, those are the kinds of things that could help. But really, when it comes to jumping through all the hoops in order to become a certified supplier, it's quite a big list of things.
So is it fair to say that one of the risks, if those barriers to entry remain, one of the risks is that the only Indigenous businesses that will be able to access procurement are big ones that have the capacity to jump through all of these hoops?
That is a risk, especially on the technology space, again, because the government is a sophisticated buyer and scale matters, right? Being larger matters. So responding to an RFP process may require a 500-page presentation deck as part of it. And you have to be a big company to have the resources to generate the content and provide, all of the experience and references to be able to do that. So helping smaller companies get to that stage or, work together to be able to demonstrate that, I think is important.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Backrack. Mr. Brock, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank the witnesses for your attendance, those online and those in person. I know you had a very long drive, so we really appreciate the effort that you put into this. So I listened very carefully to both opening statements, and I think we need to go back to how we got here. And how we got here is another example of a prime minister who engages in corrupt practices that award billions of taxpayer dollars with no oversight. Another scandal. What really brought this to light, this particular scandal, was the ArriveCan scam, an app that was supposed to cost taxpayers under $100,000 that just mushroomed into tens of millions of dollars, according to the Auditor General. At least $60 million went into this app, and that's only a guesstimate because the paperwork was absolutely shoddy. And inherent in that, we find out that there is an Indigenous claiming an Indigenous-owned company. It's called Dalian, owned by an individual by the name of David Yao. He claims the business is Aboriginally owned and veteran operated, and he works in conjunction with another company, Coridex, that the two of them together are among the top recipients of contracts under the Indigenous Set-Aside program. The company itself received close to $8 million for their work on the ArriveCan app. David Yao, when he testified at committee, could not identify exactly what he did. Most of the work was handled by Coridex, who has no Indigenous ownership, no Indigenous employees, yet the government saw fit to allow this to go unchecked, unabated. Now, you referenced at the beginning that you've done years of research, you've identified billions of dollars pilfered by fake businesses. What do you say, Crystal, as a result of that statement I'm just giving to you, that the federal government has allowed this to continue for as long as it has without any consequences?
My response is that the Ghost Warrior Society does not have any favorites in terms of political parties. I think that colonialism is equally dismal across all sectors and when it comes to serving the true needs and the true and supporting the genuine growth of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. When it comes to that particular scandal, for those two entities to have absolutely no Indigenous Aboriginal affiliation is indeed horrific, and to that extent of $8 million. It is indicative of a systemic exploitation that happens in relation to procurement and the government awarding monies in the name of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit to these companies, to these corporations, to these entities in the name of reconciliation when they are not Indigenous at all. And what measures were not met? What maintenance? What reports? What failed to that extent? And I ask that also for Nuntukavut, because like $8 million is small in comparison to, 163 million since 1994 for the Nuntukavut Community Council. Again, these are astronomical numbers. And when I say billions of dollars per year, I mean per year. If you look at the last 2 decades, that's hundreds of billions of dollars that have been pilfered from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit resources, very limited resources, and gone off to a performance of reconciliation.
I got a limited amount of time.
Yes.
This Indigenous Set-Aside program is valued at over $1 billion every year. Are there other corporations that you can identify that claim to be Indigenous-led and benefiting Indigenous communities that are in fact just shell companies?
Well, there's the Red Sky Independent Métis. There's the Métis Nation of Ontario. There's the Painted Feather Woodland Métis. We have identified over 300 fraudulent Métis organizations that exist throughout Canada, primarily in Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and across this country. They are all listed on our website. They exist as corporations such as the Red Sky Independent Métis, who sign on to resource extraction agreements and then seek to enter into resource extraction and development and economic development in the name of Indigenous engagement, but they're not Indigenous. They are settlers.
Thank you. Would you be able to provide that list to the committee? Is it easy to extract that you could provide it, or is it best we just look at your website?
We do have a partial list. It has not been updated since September. As I mentioned before, we operate solely on volunteers. We have absolutely no financial resources. Myself, I have dedicated.
Yeah. Back it down. Thanks very much. Mr. Baines, please go ahead, sir, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for joining us today for this very important study. Mr. Chair, before I begin my round of questions, I do have a small motion to move. I move that, given the chair made a unilateral decision to cancel the meeting on October 10th, 2024, then called a meeting with less than the usual practice of 48 hours notice during a constituency week without consulting other parties, the committee members request that the chair consult and obtain the consensus of the parties for calling meetings during constituency weeks and respect a minimum 48-hour notice period while adhering as much as possible to the committee's usual schedule. And this should be in everybody's.
Order, Chair.
Yep, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, Mr. Baines. Mr. General.
Yeah, this is clearly not on the matter at hand, Chair. I think Mr. Baines would be well within his rights to give notice of this motion and move it at the appropriate time. We have witnesses who.
It's my time, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to interrupt both of you. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt both of you. We're not in committee business. You do not put your notice on motion, and it's not one of. I don't believe it's one of an at-hand motion. If you want to read it into the record and then bring it up Tuesday, you are welcome to. But it's not.
I'd like to challenge your decision there, sir.
Certainly. I will have the clerk take a vote. Ms. Atwin?
Overrule the chair.
So you're voting against, because the question is whether or not the chair's ruling should be sustained.
Against.
Against. Mr. Baines?
Against.
Mr. Johari?
Against.
Mr. Zuberi?
Against.
Mr. Koto? Mr. Koto, are you there? Okay. Ms. Block?
For.
Mr. Jennings?
For.
Mr. Brock?
In favor.
Madame Vignola? On ne vous a pas entendu, Madame Vignola.
On va y aller avec contre.
Okay. And Mr. Backrack?
Against.
I think MP Koto is back.
Yeas pour 3 and nays contre 6.
The chair?
I'm here. I was here when the vote was being taken.
It wouldn't have mattered, Mr. Koto, but thanks. Okay. The chair's overruled. Continue, Mr. Baines.
Okay, sorry.
It doesn't matter, Mr. Koto.
Okay, thank you.
We'll record your vote, though, so don't worry. Baines, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I believe the motion has been emailed in both languages to everybody's inbox. And
are you speaking on Baines?
Yes, I'll just briefly speak to it. As you know, sir, it's very difficult for people like myself from the West Coast to make our way down to Ottawa when we don't have the ample amount of time to get there for some of these important studies, and we've seen this on a number of occasions. At the same time, constituency weeks for us are an opportunity to do extremely important work on several priorities that we are working on. And today, especially, there was an interim housing project, several interim housing project summits that we were working on. And in this, if we had enough, or if I had enough ample notice, I could have made adjustments to those things, and it disrupted several community partners' schedules. And again, all of this work is important. I believe you can appreciate that. So I think that if we can get to an official ruling from you on this motion with respect to what's stated in it, I think it would be appreciated if you could, follow some of the guidelines that we are all used to and that are stated out for us in the appropriate manner on how we conduct committees and the committee business. So thank you.
Okay, Mr. Genuis and then Mr. Brock. And Mr. Zuberi.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Look, this is really, really frustrating. We've all come here to work and to hear from the witnesses. I know Liberals have a caucus revolt to plan, I guess, but they should be willing to come to committee, ask questions to the witnesses. This is the studies that we've been doing for a long time. People were aware of this study happening. This is information that we need to hear from, and frankly, I haven't. The motion was just moved. It's a procedural motion, completely unrelated to the testimony that we're hearing. This is a tactic from Liberal MPs who want to silence the witnesses, who are frankly calling them out. These are witnesses that are calling Liberals out for their grotesque mismanagement of a program that was supposed to benefit Indigenous peoples. We have a witness here from the Ghost Warrior Society talking about how under this government, and willing to criticize all parties, but specifically highlighting how under this government there's been a significant growth in non-Indigenous insiders appropriating for themselves benefits that are supposed to be for Indigenous peoples. I want to hear this testimony. If government members have a response to try to justify or explain their failures, they should be willing to engage in dialogue with this witness. Instead, we have a procedural motion that's moved that's clearly out of order, that clearly could be dealt with at another time, that clearly could be discussed at a meeting next week with proper notice. But we have the witnesses here. We should hear from these witnesses instead of countenancing this Liberal tactic to try to silence witnesses that have been critical of their approach. I'm very surprised to see members of other parties supporting the government in overruling clearly a fair ruling by the chair to say that this motion was not in order. I think we need to hear from these Indigenous leaders who have made the time to come to Ottawa to give their feedback and that are contributing constructively to our study and our work. This is really surprising to see the government in the middle of this testimony move this motion that effectively is preventing these Indigenous leaders from sharing their experience, that is preventing us from getting to the bottom of this Liberal corruption within the Indigenous procurement program, where non-Indigenous, well-connected insiders have taken advantage of this program. So with that in mind, Chair, I hope we will be able to get back to the witnesses. I'm happy to review this motion. There may be details that we can discuss in it procedurally in terms of how we govern our business going forward. I think Conservatives would be very open to a reasonable discussion of this motion, but not moved at a time when it's clearly out of order, overruling the chair to say it's in order when it's not, and trying to shut down witnesses in the process. So I would now move that the committee proceed to hear from the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. That's a dilatory motion. We will take a vote, and the motion is to return to hear the witness testimony. Mr. Clerk?
Point of order. Don't we have a motion here?
Yeah, it's a Mr. Genuis. This is a dilatory motion, so we have to.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Atwin?
Point of order. I think that actually you have to move to adjourn. It's not actually a dilatory motion.
No, you don't. It's in the book.
I'm asking the clerk. I have read it.
You can ask questions to the clerk through the chair, and I've stated it's a dilatory motion, which is why we're going to the vote. But if you want to hear the clerk reaffirm what I've just said, go ahead and reaffirm just what I said. Go ahead.
Yes, I can reaffirm what the chair said. Indeed, the motion that was moved by Mr. Genuis is considered a dilatory motion, which is to be put forward forthwith without amendment or debate.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Atwin?
No.
Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. Johari?
No.
Mr. Zuberi?
No.
Mr. Cotto?
No. No.
Ms. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Genuis?
Yes.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Madame Vignola?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
No.
Yeas pour 4-4 and nays contre 6-6.
Motion is defeated. Now on to Mr. Brock. Mr. Zabari.
Point of order. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to flag I lowered and raised my hand by mistake, but I still want to keep my order. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was getting to your name than Mr. Jawari's. Mr. Brock, go ahead.
Well, I have much to say. First, I want to deeply apologize to both of our witnesses who are here to continue a discussion and an examination and review of a very serious issue. As I identified, Ms. Samaniganis, you traveled over 5 hours from Northern Ontario to be here in person. My colleague, Mr. Genuis, said how disappointing this maneuver was. He used softer language than I intend on using. I find it disgusting. I find it disrespectful, and a social justice issue such as this deserves the appropriate amount of time. Now, to the individuals you've heard on Zoom, some of my colleagues, the Liberal colleagues from British Columbia, for instance, talk about break weeks, and we all enjoy break weeks from time to time. But the nice thing about being a parliamentarian and having a hybrid format such as this, where people can appear in person and appear on screen, is you can talk and walk, you can talk and chew gum at the same time. For instance, this morning, this meeting started at 12 noon. I was engaging with constituents this morning in my riding by telephone and by Zoom. I intend on doing the very same thing before I leave Ottawa. And when I return to my riding, I'll be doing the same thing. You don't often hear that from the Liberal colleagues, because what has been happening here for the better part of 2 years that we've been examining one scandal after another is we see a pattern of shutting down uncomfortable, difficult conversations. This Prime Minister, and I know you don't want to be political, but I certainly can, has the reputation of being the only Prime Minister in the history of this country to have been found guilty not once, but twice of ethical violations.
Point of order.
Ministers in his cabinet.
Sorry, Mr. Brock, excuse me. Go ahead on your point of order.
I'd just like to call into question the relevance of what Mr. Brock is putting forward right now.
Oh, I intend on getting there, Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Brock.
The Prime Minister set an example of unethical governance and an unethical way of being a steward of taxpayer monies. After he was found guilty twice, various ministers of his cabinet have been found guilty. Other members of his backbench have been found guilty of ethical violations. So we see a pattern that I have seen in this particular committee. I have seen at Public Accounts, another parliamentary committee. I have seen at Justice. I have seen at Ethics. To give you a couple of examples to both witnesses. We had the Auditor General who finally took an interest in conducting an audit of the ArriveCan scandal. I referenced that in the first question I put to you.
Yes, Ms. Atwin?
Mr. Chair, we're debating a motion about you showing respect and giving notice for meetings. This has nothing to do with what Mr. Brock is going off about right now, and I would just really like for your ruling on relevance.
We always allow wide latitude in the discussions. I think every one of you has been called on relevance on previous motions. I'm sure Mr. Brock will get to it. Go ahead, Mr. Brock.
Absolutely, and to Ms. Atwin and the rest of her Liberal colleagues, I informed you at the outset this is going to be lengthy, and I will get to relevancy, but it'll be on my time, Ms. Atwin, certainly not yours or any member of your party. So to give you an example of the disrespect shown by the Liberal Party and its members and the NDP, which at that point was in a coalition with the Liberal government, and hypocrisy is just abundant when we're talking about the NDP party because they talk a tough game in the House. They talk tough in social media about
order,
how
Mr. Chair?
difficult.
Yeah, Mr. Coteau, again, we might have an issue with your mic, so...
Can I try?
Yeah, I was going to say try, but don't go too fast, and I'll interrupt you if we're having an issue, but go ahead and I'll wait for a signal from our interpreters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm new to the committee, but I just want to make sure if we just vote on this procedural vote quickly, we can get back to the witnesses, right? We could be back to the witnesses after a vote in 2 minutes. If we just stop debating and deal with the motion,
okay?
Correct?
Let me just see if the translation's working and everything. Oh, we're okay. It's not really a point of order, but yes,
Okay.
if they're...
I just, just so the witnesses know that if we actually stop debating this procedural item and voted on it, we could actually get back to it right away.
If it was withdrawn, we
Thank
could
you.
get back to it right away. If it was voted on, we'd get back to it right away. So both ways, yes. Go ahead, Mr. Brock.
So to the witnesses here, I wanted to give you a couple of examples of similar situations that you've just experienced where they want to silence witnesses. The ArriveCan scandal, when it first gained speed, the Auditor General was conducting an audit. She was asked to attend a committee to give us an update on the audit. It was then revealed that the RCMP had started an investigation. I had put a question to the Auditor General about when she was informed that the RCMP had started their investigation, and her response was, I read it in the newspaper just like everybody else. And I expressed my deep concern and disgust that the Liberal government did not see fit to inform the Auditor General about this important fact. The moment I asked that question, my time was up. It went to a Liberal member who moved to adjourn the committee. So she literally spoke for maybe 10 minutes and a 2-hour meeting had collapsed. Similarly, other issues, RCMP commissioner attends various committees. Again, they didn't like the line of questioning. We were put to the RCMP commissioner. They moved to shut down. So it really surprised me at the timing of this particular motion, given that one Liberal member actually asked relevant questions and gave me the impression that all members here, including the government, including the NDP, including the Bloc, who voted in favor of ruling against the chair in this particular motion, wanted to sidestep the hearing of crucial evidence. So I assure you, ma'am, that regardless of what decision is made today, I will ensure that you're not silenced. I will ensure that the representatives of Plato would not be silenced. I will ensure that any Indigenous representative, whether they be in person or representing an organization, will never be silenced when it comes to this particular corruption and mismanagement of government, of taxpayer funds.
Point of order.
As I indicated to you, this is over $1 billion
Sorry,
every
Mr. Brock,
year.
Sorry, I did not see whose point of order.
Michael Coteau online.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Coteau.
If Mr. Brock wants to not silence the witnesses, why doesn't he just let us vote?
That's not a point of order, Mr. Coteau. Go ahead, Mr. Brock.
So, nice try, Mr. Coteau, but that's the point, and that's the message I want to deliver to you, that these type of procedural shenanigans ought not to happen, particularly when we're dealing with a sensitive issue such as this. So I assure you, you will have an opportunity of fully participating in this committee. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I have Mr. Zuberi, then Mr. Jouari, then Mrs. Vignola.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Jabari.
Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Jabari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I simply want to be very brief. I think that we should reduce our interventions on this subject in the interest of actually hearing the witnesses. I find the testimony extremely interesting and do believe that the number one domestic human rights issue is reconciliation with Indigenous people. And Indigenous peoples, and what the testimony we're hearing today is very, very important. That being said, what Mr. Baines has brought forth with respect to a motion is also important in terms of how committees operate, in this committee in particular. With full respect to the committee members, it would make sense, and to the witnesses, that invitations be sent out with a minimal, respectable delay. And I think that's really what we're debating here, which is wholly pertinent to this particular meeting, but also future meetings. Therefore, I want to keep my intervention very, very brief because I do want to hear from the witnesses. And I hope that we can vote on this subject within short order so we can continue this meeting as scheduled.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jawari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to echo what a number of my colleagues have already said. So Ms. Admins talked about the fact that we really do need the time. We have not had a subcommittee meeting to be able to set the agenda. We trust the chair to make sure that he uses judgment. Sending notices out in less than 48 hours result to the situation that we are facing. Now we have of our 5 full-time members, we have 2 of them who could not attend, which now we have to go back and brief to prepare for the next meeting that we are going to have on Indigenous procurement. And that is not fair to us. That's not fair to them. Also, that such a short notice does not allow us to be able to properly prepare to ask the question that we should be asking to ensure that the government and get the feedback that they should get. So if this meeting was planned way before, we didn't know about it. So that is an issue. Not following the guideline in the form. We've always worked very collaboratively. We, had a meeting on last Thursday, which got canceled in less than 20 minutes notice, and was given to another conservative chair to be able to run an impromptu meeting that caused another issue. So we are here to work. No question about it. We are here. All our documents, as I've said many times, we've scrambled. We've changed our schedule to make sure that we could participate in this meeting, but not everyone in the committee can do that because there are commitments. 2 of our members could not be here today. And most of us have changed, and we gladly change given this. We are not asking for you to cancel the meeting. We are not saying not have the meeting during the constituency week. All we are saying is, if you're going to have this meeting during the constituency week, give us 48 hours. And had we had that conversation in less than 2 minutes, it would be back into the vote, respecting the committee, getting the 48 hours notice, making sure that we can get all our members here, make sure that we are properly prepared, and benefit from the testimony of the 2 witnesses that we have, that I look forward going back very quickly. And I'm not sure why our conservative colleagues, with all due respect, are filibustering rather than sticking to the point. Let's vote. Let's make sure we get 48 hours notice, even in the constituency week. Let's make sure we can get permanent team members here. And let's make sure that we really give ourselves good time to prepare so we can ask the question that's going to help us. It's their recommendation that's going to go in the report. Thank you.
Great. Before we go to Mrs. Vignola, last Thursday, if you recall, a couple of meetings ago, we had agreed, Mrs. Vignola graciously agreed to move back her motion so we could hear from witnesses. And then by the time it came to her motion, it got bumped by another motion. So I was, and I think I'd communicated Thursday, we were going to allow time, committee time, to allow Mrs. Vignola to specifically do her motion again that she got bumped for. And I think we all felt bad that she played the bigger role and then ended up having her time taken from her. So Thursday we were going to do that. I found out Thursday that Mrs. Vignola was not going to be available. So I decided to move that time for her to Tuesday, which is why we canceled the Thursday. Extraordinary circumstances, again, to allow Mrs. Vignola the right to bring in her motion that kind of was taken from her in a previous meeting, but that's why Thursday was. Mrs. Vignola, go ahead, please, your intervention. Mrs. Vignola?
Yeah. Is it my turn, Mr. Chair? Yes, okay. Sorry, I didn't hear my name. So concerning last Thursday, I was surprised. I was about me not being there. There was something going on Friday.
Sorry, Madame Vignola, to be clear, I'm not blaming you. I'm just I found out you would not be available and I had set aside time. So I just wanted to make sure we had time available because we had bumped you, if you recall, from a previous opportunity to speak on a motion you had presented. But that's why I'm not pointing fingers at you for the reason. It was to allow you that opportunity as we had planned. Sorry, continue.
OK. On en reparlera d'une manière.
Okay, we'll maybe talk about it later. So I want to hear from our witnesses. The goal of this motion is not to filibuster and to show how much each political party is so virtuous. The motion is just to remind everyone that it would be nice to be made aware of a meeting being scheduled more than 48 hours in advance because we organize our schedules and things can be complicated. Personally, I would prefer to be in person in Ottawa for different personal reasons. However, this was not possible with less than 48 hours notice. Precisely, we received just over 24 hours notice. So I was not able to drive 6 hours to be prepared, get enough sleep, and be there in person for the committee. And so I think it's simply a question of respect for everyone, including our witnesses. And we're not trying to open the door to filibustering. I think it's a friendly motion. I read it. It seems to be rather, again, friendly. And I don't think we need to politicize this any further. The presence of our witnesses is very important. What they have to share with us is very important. And I don't want anyone to read between the lines that I don't care about our witnesses. I, of course, care very much about all our First Nations. Let's try to be respectful in terms of presuming what I may or may not think. I would appreciate that. That being said, I would ask that we move on to a vote before I go too far. Thank you.
Anyone else on the speaker's list? Mr. Generous?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just a few other things. Just like this motion is obviously deeply flawed. Like I would be very open to a discussion of some of the issues raised by the motion at another time. But like, I mean, I think this motion is not in order for a number of other reasons. One of which is that it seeks to not withstand the rules of the House. Like the rules of the House prescribe a 1064 procedure for bringing witnesses in, and this motion appears to say that you have to have unanimity of all parties before you can convene a meeting outside of the regular time slots. That is a violation of Standing 1064. So it's not even within the committee's authority to prescribe that. This is hastily drafted, and like if we're gonna treat this motion with some degree of seriousness, it's flawed from a procedural standpoint. I don't think this is what this is about. I think the Liberals are hearing harsh testimony from witnesses that are calling out their own failures. But like the motion has to be written and presented properly if we're going to have if we're going to be able to actually consider it. So, Chair, I'd like you to ask you maybe to just rule on that component of it in particular. I don't think that it's been raised yet in terms of those limitations. And I mean, maybe if a committee passes a motion that tries to notwithstand the rules of the House, then it just doesn't apply or something. But this is this is just another issue with this. I think we should come back to this motion, which is why again, there are things to discuss, but I think we can come back to it at another point in time. But I don't know, maybe Chair, I'll wait for your feedback on that.
Hey, Mrs. Well, you have a point on the 1064. I'm not sure, Mr. Baines, the spirit behind the motion was specifically directed at myself or at 1064s as well. It is rather unclear, I guess, in the motion. Would be nice if it was properly stated and lined out so we knew exactly what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Okay. So like I move that we proceed to hearing from the witnesses, and well, I won't attach a condition to that because I know that would make it a debatable motion. But of course, we can return to it at any point. Like we can return to it later today. We can return to it tomorrow. We can return to it. We can work on some language that resolves these procedural issues. But I want to hear from the witnesses. And like let's set aside some time to establish a procedure. If we want to establish a procedure around break weeks, let's have some offline conversations and let's do it. Let's try to be reasonable. If members want to do that, great. I move that we proceed to hearing from witnesses.
Okay. Before we get to that dilatory vote, I'm happy to set aside time either tomorrow or Tuesday, and we'll get it straightened out. We can either do it public, we can do it offline in the meeting, just so we can move forward. But I'll leave that up to everyone around the table. But we'll go to the vote on resuming questioning with the witnesses. Go ahead, sir.
Ms. Atwin?
Mr. Chair, just as a point of order, this vote is to adjourn debate, correct? Not to proceed to the witnesses? I don't believe proceeding to the witnesses is dilatory.
It is. Sorry, just on that.
We just had that earlier.
Yeah.
No, it is, and that's what we had earlier, and I ruled on it. The clerk reaffirmed it as well. So we're just returning to the witnesses.
Ms. Atwin?
No, we need to talk about that.
No.
Does the motion stay valid after? Continue.
Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. Johari?
No.
Monsieur Zuberi?
No.
Mr. Cotto?
No.
Ms. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Jennings?
Yes.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Madame Vignala? Je ne vous ai pas entendu, Madame Vignala.
Oui.
Oui. Mr. Backrack?
No.
Yeas pour 4, 4, and nays contre 6. 6.
We're back to the motion. Mr. Generous.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I am very disappointed that we're not able to proceed with a motion to get back to the witnesses. The government's position seems to be that they will refuse to allow the witnesses to testify as a way of forcing us to advance a motion that is poorly drafted, that is out of order, that seeks to ignore the established rules of the House without any kind of dialogue whatsoever. And I think this is unfortunately clearly a way of them avoiding hearing from the testimony that Plato and the Ghost Warrior Society have to offer. I've said, and I'll say it again, we're ready to discuss some procedure around how we could approach these meetings that conforms to the rules of the House, recognizing that the vast majority of parliamentary committees have government chairs, that this committee has an opposition chair, and that part of the reason some committees have an opposition chair is it allows them to have a few additional tools for getting to issues of government corruption. We are trying to investigate the Liberal Indigenous procurement scandal, where, as we have heard, there has been just a flagrant disregard for what Indigenous organizations are saying about Indigenous identity in the course of the way the government has administered these programs. And people can go back and look at the discussions. Liberals were extremely reluctant about this study happening at all. They wanted to severely constrain the number of meetings we had on it. They wanted to severely limit the number of ministers that would be called. They have done everything they can to avoid us getting to the bottom of their own failures. Liberals used to talk about how the most important relationship that they had as a government was with Indigenous people. You don't hear them even saying that anymore because they have frankly they've given up on delivering results. They have tried to have a program that looks on the face of it like it's delivering opportunity for Indigenous communities, but in reality, they have admitted that it's not about that. It's, according to the minister, the only purpose of the program is identifying indigeneity, and as we've heard today, it can't even effectively identify indigeneity. So Liberals have been failing so profoundly when it comes to delivering results, especially in the area of economic development and opportunity for Indigenous Canadians, for all Canadians. And this is the context in which they have sidelined discussion with a
I'm sorry, someone is singing online. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Janis. Go ahead, Mr. Janis.
Yeah. So look, if we're going to be forced to have this procedural discussion, then I have I have an amendment to put forward to the motion. In some ways, I'm reluctant to do that because I don't want to. I would rather not indulge this at all. I would rather just insist on the point that we should hear from the witnesses and deal with this motion in a proper way at the proper time. Instead, we're into procedural kind of back and forth on a matter that is not on the agenda, is not in order, and we've got witnesses that are sitting here that have in some cases traveled a long distance and a long time to testify. So I'm sorry that we're here, but but it's obviously it's not our desire that we're here, right? We want to be talking about the substance of the Indigenous procurement issues. And look, the other thing is, if the government's serious about working on solutions to this issue, let's work on solutions. I think this committee could actually work constructively and put forward some very good solutions around the area of making the Indigenous procurement program work as it's intended, and actually shed some light on the problems and the needs for improvement. Instead, the government is choosing a different direction, sadly. So, Chair, I see some other hands. Maybe I'll hold off on moving my amendment for the moment. And I don't know if other members want to. I would like us to be able to adjourn this debate and move back to where we are. So maybe I'll just conclude my comments for now by moving a motion to adjourn debate on this. And if it comes back to me, I guess I'll move an amendment. But I would rather just get to hearing from the witnesses. So at this point, I'll move that we'll see where it goes. I'll move that we adjourn debate on this.
Go ahead, sir. Ms. Atwin?
No.
Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. Johari?
No.
Monsieur Zuberi?
No.
Mr. Cotto?
No.
Ms. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Janis?
Yes.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Madame Vignala?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
No.
Okay, yeas pour 4, 4, and nays contre 6, 6. Back to the motion, Mr. Brock.
Well, amazement again. During my first intervention, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses, I was spending some time highlighting how deeply disappointed I was with this particular tactic and the timing of this tactic to delay hearing. Again, another tactic.
Sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Atwin. Mrs. Atwin.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you could provide us with the speaking list. My hand's been out for quite some time. I'm not sure where Mr. Brock was in that order.
Yes, I have yourself, then Mr. Coteau, and then Mr. Genuous. Go ahead, Mr. Brock.
Thank you. During my initial remarks, I heard from various members, particularly from the government, that they wanted to get back to hearing from the witnesses. I heard that from at least 2 members, and I see that, Crystal, you're shaking your head in the affirmative because that's what we all believed. Let's limit the discussion. Let's get back to a vote, and let's get to hearing the witnesses. So how deeply, deeply disappointed I am to hear that was never their agenda all along. Just to my point, they will take every opportunity to shut down committees where it's deeply, deeply embarrassing to them. Yet another scandal that's within their making. They've turned a blind eye to this practice for years, despite various organizations, despite many, many Indigenous leaders from across this country warning the government about the abuses. We finally got a committee to study this abuse. And what do they want to do? They want to talk about the structure by which we hold meetings during break weeks, because that's more of a priority to them, the actual process, than it is to examine their own failed, corrupt practices. And to learn that the NDP, who we thought, according to Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP party, who had torn up the supply and confidence agreement, again, just a play on Canadians. The timing was to reinforce his efforts in the by-elections in Winnipeg and the by-elections in Quebec, because clearly we see this now at this committee. We've been seeing it in the House, that this NDP government that really holds no core identity anymore as to what they truly believe in will criticize the government and then vote blindly in favor. And now we have an NDP member who I thought wanted to hear from witnesses, wanted to engage in this particular debate, wanted to get to recommendations so that we can improve economic reconciliation across this great nation with Indigenous nations and Indigenous neighbors. It's all a ploy. It's a ploy to keep this government in power, to shut down these important debates. So how hypocritical to hear from this NDP member. The coalition is still alive. And again, I offer my apologies. We will get to a point where we'll continue this conversation. I don't have any hope that it's going to happen today, but I look forward to seeing you again, and to the witness on Zoom. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Brock. We have Mr. Coteau, Mrs. Atwin, then Mr. Coteau, and then Mr. Genuous.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. If we could just vote on this matter, we could get back to the witnesses. And so this idea that there's procedural shenanigans at foot and it's on behalf of us is quite shocking. My goodness, we absolutely want to hear from the witnesses. The grandstanding, it's almost laughable for me to see the Conservatives speak in this way. I'd love to give them the opportunity to continue to speak on their expertise and knowledge and how much they support Indigenous communities, because I think it's important and it should be a nonpartisan issue. I just really want to know why we're so opposed to the chair showing us respect. This is a very simple motion that we could have been able to get through as a committee. We want to be prepared. We want to be here to put our best foot forward for this important study. And again, Mr. Brock, this idea that we just have these open, days on these break weeks. These are constituency weeks. We have very specific meetings scheduled with organizations, with entities. I'm supposed to be at a Indigenous social work conference right now, which is really important to me as well. So, your disappointment is well placed, I think, with yourself. And so I would really like to just close this matter, get to a vote, and absolutely hear from these incredible witnesses who have come forward today. Thank you.
Mr. Coteau.
Yeah, and I would agree 100% with my colleague. I sit on 2 committees, and I've never seen this before, where a last-minute decision was made by the chair without consulting any of the members outside of his colleagues to make a decision. And just for the witnesses to take note that 90% of the actual talking time is being occupied by the Conservatives. So if they really want to get back to business, they just have to stop talking and let's deal with this motion. It's very simple. It's just saying basically respect the committees and consult them when calling a meeting. And it's that simple. So if the Conservatives really want to get things moving, just stop talking and let's vote. Thank you.
Mr. Generous.
Okay, Chair. So just to respond to a couple of the just absurd things that have just been said, like listen to the argument that Mr. Coteau is making. He's like, all we're asking for is respect and proper notice. And therefore we've moved a motion with 0 notice that has nothing to do with the topic. It was ruled out of order by the chair. And then they overruled the chair because they don't understand the rules. It's clear they don't understand the rules because they're asking what motions are as they're being moved. So you have Liberals that are being given a strategy by TMO staffers. They don't understand the procedural mechanics at all. They don't understand the rules. And then they're putting forward a motion with 0 notice that would effectively gut the ability of the opposition to be able to convene meetings. The vast majority of parliamentary committees have government chairs. And the idea that government chairs haven't convened meetings, I mean, it is in times and places and ways that they have chosen to without consultation of the committee. The idea that hasn't happened is complete nonsense. And somehow when opposition
just stop talking
chairs of committees.
Sorry, let me interrupt. Sorry, Mr. Generous. Mr. Coteau, if you have a point of order, please just a point of order to the chair, but please don't interrupt. And that goes for everyone, both all 4 parties, please. Continue, Mr. Generous.
Yeah. But I have the floor now. So Mr. Coteau is again just demonstrating that he doesn't understand the rules. He doesn't understand how committees work. The rules
part of point of order.
Move
point of order.
Okay.
When you have
sorry, Mr. Generous.
Or when it's on a matter.
Sorry, Mr. Generous. We have a point of order. Your point of order, Mr. Coteau.
I find it very disrespectful. Just on privilege here, I find it very disrespectful that the member just accused me of not understanding parliamentary procedure. I would have the member know that, I've been elected for 20 years. I've served.
Okay, Mr. Coteau, what is your Mr. Coteau? What is your point of order?
I just, the point of order is that the member is being very disrespectful and just assuming that he basically said that I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay.
It's very disrespectful.
Your point.
As the chair, I think you should hold him accountable to make sure
Mr.
that when he's making reference, I want him to apologize.
Yeah, Mr. Coteau, that's not a point of order, but your point is made, and I understand your point, Mr. Coteau. Not dismissing it, but
thank you.
Not a point of order, but your point's made. Mr. Generous, please.
Thank you, Chair. Look, to say this very gently, Mr. Coteau, you have just raised a point of order that you don't like something that I said regarding you not knowing the rules. That point of order itself demonstrates a lack of understanding of what constitutes a point of order. So I'm not.
Let's return to the motion.
Do you want a point of privilege?
I'm sorry that you're
point of privilege, Mr. Chair.
But
point of privilege.
Sorry, Mr. Generous. Go ahead, Mr. Coteau.
If you want to go to the next level here, we can do that. You're being very disrespectful to me as a parliamentarian, making the assumption that I don't know what I'm doing in my job. Is very disrespectful, and I want you to apologize. Okay. Or at least withdraw the statement.
Okay, Mr. Coteau, I appreciate what you're saying. It's not a point of privilege. By ruling, Mr. Generous, the floor is yours, but let's return to the motion, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Chair. Just respectfully, like the committee has established rules. Those rules define what is a point of order. Those rules define what a point of privilege is. And so when a Liberal member misuses those terms and concepts to try to interrupt someone who's speaking, that suggests a certain lack of familiarity with those rules.
What about the lack of just decency?
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt,
Dan,
Chair.
What about the lack of
Okay, Mr. Coteau.
Chair?
Mr. Coteau, please. Mr. Generous has the floor. I'm going to ask him to return and stick with the motion. If someone has a point of order, a valid point of order, please address the point of order to the chair, but otherwise let's not be talking over each other. Mr. Generous, please return to the motion.
Thank you. And the context of the motion, I just find it baffling that Liberals both take offense to being called out for not following the rules of committee and insist on not following the rules of committee at the same time. This was a motion that was not in order. The rules of moving a motion are designed to allow members to be able to consider matters appropriately and for committees to regulate their activities. So if you have a motion that is on a substantive matter that is not related to what's currently before the committee, then you have to give 48 hours notice. That is the proper procedure. You give a 48-hour notice for moving a motion. Those are the rules of the committee. And you might like other notice requirements to apply to other things, but that's the rule book. And then if you move, you can move a motion without notice if it is on the matter being discussed before the committee. So then you have Liberals decided that they wanted to, in their coalition with the NDP, decided that they wanted to be able to move a motion that was not on notice, and they wanted to be able to surprise us with it, and then try to make this silly argument that somehow it's our fault for not immediately endorsing sight unseen this motion that we didn't receive proper notice of. Well, that is not only unreasonable and unfair, but that is a violation of the rules of committee. But Liberals and New Democrats, acting as a coalition, have overruled the chair to try to move a motion at a time when they are not allowed to normally move that motion, and at a time when we have witnesses sitting before us whose testimony they are disrupting. So they're complaining about a lack of notice while moving a motion without notice. Now, look, on this point about constituency weeks, we all come from relatively large caucuses, some larger than others. If government members had pressing obligations, they might well have advised some of their colleagues that there was important work that was happening at the committee, and could they substitute for them? That was always an option. Look, we all have to prioritize between different things that are happening, but this is extremely important work, and we have a lot of work, a lot of studies before us, the Government Operations Committee, and we also have uncertain timing around various other political events. So this work needs to get done, and proceeding with that work this week with the allowances for substitution makes eminent sense. So the idea of this motion more broadly is that this is a motion that would make it almost impossible, given this requirement for seeming requirement for unanimity among parties, make it virtually impossible to have meetings outside of those specifically defined time constraints. And look, having more meetings than just the windows we have during sitting weeks is what has allowed this committee to get to the bottom of so much Liberal corruption. Having some of these extra meetings has allowed us to get to the bottom of Liberal corruption around government contracting, these abuses we've seen of the Indigenous contracting system. All of this is possible. All of this has been enabled because this is a committee that has been prepared to go above and beyond and get its work done. And no surprise, Liberals do not want that work to be able to continue, which is why they are now trying to throw on the table in the middle of witness testimony the surprise motion that would effectively require unanimity of parties in order to be able to convene a break week. I don't think that's right. I think that's going to undermine the important work of pursuing accountability at this critical accountability committee. This is the work that we're supposed to do as parliamentarians. And I know we all have things we want to do in our constituencies, but the critical work that we're supposed to do as parliamentarians is to review and hold accountable the operations of the executive. That's especially the responsibility of the Government Operations Committee. And we need to have some flexibility to do that. This is an opposition chaired committee for a reason, because the tools of that chairship allow the pursuit of these various scandals that we have seen inflict government broadly over the last 9 years. But this is an important issue. It's a substantial policy issue. I would say let us do this work. We are, this is an obviously flawed motion, and I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to go into it. Look, I'll propose that amendment if we have to. But in the meantime, look, we've got now under 20 minutes left. Rather than go through amendments back and forth on this motion, let's give the remaining time back to the witnesses and set aside some time to continue on this motion and to work out some of those details at another date soon. I think if members want to have the discussion on a procedure, this motion isn't it. This motion, I think, has a lot of obvious flaws in it. We can work out the procedure at another time soon, but let's give the balance of the time back to the witnesses, and let's set aside some time to do that. So I would now move that we proceed to hearing from the witnesses.
Ms. Atwin?
Point of order.
Can't point of order in the middle of a vote.
Like, the vote, I believe, is out of order itself. Can you move the same dilatory motion?
Yes, you can. Events have occurred in between.
The motion, so that's the logic.
Yeah, you can. Continue, sir.
Ms. Atwin?
No.
Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. Johari?
No.
Mr. Zuberi?
No.
Mr. Cotto?
No.
Ms. Block?
Yes.
Mr. Jennings?
Yes.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Madame Vignola?
Oui.
Mr. Backrack?
No.
So yeas pour 4-4 and nays contre 6-6.
Resuming the speaking list, I have Mrs. Vignola and then Mr. Jennings.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So it was an unfortunate session because we did not hear from our witnesses. And one of them drove 5 hours to come here in person, and I know that that's quite the long drive, and Northern Ontario is probably looks like the 389, a highway that I've taken a lot. That being said, concerning the motion and the rules. So we were given 24 hours, 39 minutes notice of this meeting at 3:22. So that was just over 24 hours before the meeting. This is not an emergency debate. This is a study that was already underway. This was not a 1064. And this is not our typical sitting day. Usually we sit on Tuesdays from 11 to 1 and Thursdays as well at the same time. So I'm wondering who is benefiting from this filibuster. And if you want to find out, you can simply look at many different videos that you can find on social media. So I would ask that we vote on the motion as quickly as possible. We only have 13 minutes left. I think that we could use these 13 minutes to hear from our witnesses. So in terms of procedure, we can talk about many things pertaining to this. But right now, it's important to think of respect. We will have another meeting tomorrow that was also given less than 24 hours notice, and they did not provide a 1064 for this meeting. Now, I have no issue with meeting during break weeks, even if it changes up my meetings with organizations. It makes me change my schedule. Of course, hybrid work is great, but I think we're all tired of it. And it doesn't offer the warmth, the eye contact of being there in person and being there with those that matter to us and for those that we represent. So if possible, I would request a vote on the motion. Thank you.
Okay, we have Mr. Genuis, then Mr. Baines.
Well, thank you, Chair. I guess since we are here, I'll move an amendment that tries to make this stupid motion make a little bit more sense plausibly. Again, I wish we weren't here. I wish we were hearing from the witnesses, but my amendment would strike out the words from given the chair. The words given the chair made a unilateral decision to cancel the meeting on October 10th, 2024, then call the meeting with less than. And it would add after the word the chair adhere to the. It would strike out the words the committee members and replace them with or, and strike out the words and respect a minimum 48-hour notice period while adhering as much as possible to the committee's usual schedule. The revised would read that the chair adhere to the usual practice of 48 hours of notice during a constituency week without consulting other parties, or request the chair consult and obtain the consensus of the parties for calling meetings during constituency weeks. This amendment would be consistent with Standing Order 1064. It wouldn't seek to violate the rules of the House. It would require a 48-hour notice period or agreement of the parties to proceed. So it would address what some have claimed to be the motivating issue here. I don't think it is the motivating issue, but it would address what some have claimed to be the motivating issue without creating a procedure that would make it entirely impossible to hold a break week, hold meetings outside of the narrow confines of what the House gives us during sitting weeks. Look, we on the substance of this, we have tight constraints during sitting weeks, especially as it relates to House resources, and we've seen how this plays out. So the constituency weeks, they do provide some time and some opportunity where we're not under the same resource constraint. So I think this is a reasonable amendment. It's frustrating because if we had been approached in advance of this meeting, if we had set aside some committee time, if we had worked out, we could have gone back and forth and gotten to this much earlier. But I'll put forward that amendment now. I wish we were hearing from the witnesses, but the amendment is there, and we'll see how people react to it. And I don't know if there's a way of bringing it home, so to speak.
Send that up. We don't have it in French, so we cannot send it out. Well, no, sorry, Mr. Genuis, I need you to clarify. The clerk and I were looking. It almost seems like they might be contradictory. Well, what you're looking for.
I don't have it translated because I didn't have notice that this motion was coming.
Yes.
So if someone had told me the motion was coming or proper notice has been given, so I would have
no, I understand. No, it's not the French part.
Translated motion, but as it is, while trying to follow the debate and write amendments at the same time,
So I can just read it back, and then we'll start a speaking list on it. That the chair adhere to the usual practice of 48 hours of meeting, 48 hours of notice during a constituency week without consulting other parties, or request that the chair consult and retain the consensus of the parties for calling meetings during constituency weeks, period. So we'll start speaking list. Mr. Baines, your hand is up. Is that from the original motion or on the amendment?
It's more of a point of order. Yeah. I just wanted to maybe mention, because I feel like this is...
Sounds like it's not a point of order.
Mr. Genuis, please allow Mr. Baines to have the floor. Go ahead, Mr. Baines.
So I wanted to, in order to request for the guests that are with us today, I understand this motion may take us past the time, so I wanted to ensure that they have the opportunity to provide us by email recommendations of some of the questions or any recommendations that they have towards this study at any time if they don't get an opportunity to speak again today. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, on the same point of order, Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
On the same point of order, no way is Mr. Baines going to be able to relegate these witnesses to email. We will invite these witnesses back to the committee to provide a full account response to say whatever they want about what happened today and their views. And
point of order, Mr.
I will I'm going to interrupt both of you, Mr. Genuis and Mr. Baines. I have the floor. I have the floor. I appreciate both of your interventions. I was going to suggest they could provide in writing, but I was also going to suggest that we will have them back if they will tolerate coming back to us. So an invitation to return will be extended to them. And yes, an invitation to provide anything in writing will be available as well. So thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Baines. Appreciate it. And Mr. Genuis, for your point. And I think we've got Mr. Genuis as the floor.
Sorry, no, I moved my amendment, and I think it's...
Sorry, speaking this on the amendment then, Mr. Oh, sorry, we were at Mr. Baines. You had your hand up for the original motion. Did you want to speak on the amendment as well?
No, I'll withdraw my hand. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll keep your hand up for the original motion, though. Oh, go ahead, Mrs. Block.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I've listened with interest and frustration at many of the interventions that have been put forward by members on the opposite side of the table to us. And I would simply say that I believe that this amendment to the motion that was table dropped here today and which sidelined our conversation with the two witnesses does address the concerns that were raised in the original motion when it comes to consulting with other parties when it comes to meeting during break week. So I fully support this amendment and would hope that the members of the Liberal Party, the Bloc, and the NDP would see this as a way of continuing to stay true to the standing orders that we function and operate by, but addressing the concern that was raised today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, Mr. Backrack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been staying out of this conversation because I was thinking that perhaps if I did, it would shorten the debate and bring us back to hearing from the witnesses in a more timely way. On the amendment that Mr. Genuis has moved, I'm not sure that the language is precise enough to achieve what he thinks it's achieving. When he was characterizing the amendment, he mentioned agreement from other parties, but the word consultation does not imply agreement. I think the original motion reflects the frustration that many are feeling, including two other opposition parties. We very much want to hold the government accountable, but we want to do that in a way that is predictable and effective and respectful of our time. The Conservatives have continually referred to break weeks, and perhaps Conservatives take breaks during those weeks. But for some of us who represent constituencies the size of Poland, constituency weeks mean spending hours and hours in the car, driving thousands of kilometers, visiting multiple communities, and working for the entire week only to get back on an airplane and spend an entire day flying back to Ottawa. So the challenge with these surprise meetings, you mentioned the frustration of a surprise motion and a surprise amendment. The challenge with surprise meetings is that it requires us to cancel all of our other engagements with constituents and organizations that we had planned to undertake. And I share the frustration that has been voiced so far. I note that the Committee for National Security and Public Safety is having an emergency meeting on a very pressing matter, and that meeting was established under Section 106.4, which provides for consultation with the other parties. It doesn't require unanimity. It requires that a certain number of members of the committee consent to the meeting being held, and it compels the chair to schedule that meeting accordingly. I don't see any reason why we can't have an agreement among us as members of this committee to not hold meetings during constituency weeks unless the conditions of Section 106.4 are met. I think that would be a very reasonable compromise that would allow the opposition parties to effectively hold this government to account, to hear from witnesses on time-sensitive and important emerging matters, and to conduct the work of the committee in the best possible way while also respecting the schedules of the members of the committee, some of whom represent ridings on the other side of the country. So I can't support the amendment because I don't believe that the wording reflects the intent of the mover, and I don't believe that it significantly strengthens the procedure from where we are now. I would support an amendment that gets us back to the place where we don't hold meetings during constituency weeks unless a certain number of members of the committee agree that such a meeting is warranted. Thank you.
Mr. Brock, very briefly. Oh, yeah.
Signaling to you.
Yeah. Mr. Backrack, we are out of resources, so I will be adjourning, I'm afraid. Maybe you can put that, your proposed amendment in writing, and I have it ready for when this debate resumes. But we are adjourned.
Together